Okay, let's move on to the second part of our test number 2 review. We're going to go really over the Gemara skills and the Gemara philosophy and ideas about Gemara learning that we need to know for the test. This will probably be the second part of the test. Here we go. The first concept we're going to discuss is the concept of using analogy. When learning Gemara and when learning Halacha, and this Gemara is really a Gemara that discusses Halachot more than anything, law, an important strategy is to be able to use analogy to give a psak, here's the bottom line in different situations. And the way you do that is, as you say, listen, let me find one scenario where I know what the halacha is, what the law is, and then if I can find, if I could say that the scenario that it's in front of me is similar to the one where I know the halacha is, if the halachot are the same, then I could say that if the scenarios are similar, then I could say the halacha one applies to the other. So if I have situation X, here, or whatever it is, I already know what the ruling is, and I have situation Y, and I've concluded that you can make an analogy between situation X and situation Y. They are equivalent, they are close enough, they are similar enough, then I can say that the same ruling which applies to in situation X, I can also apply that same situation in situation Y, because if the scenarios are the same, then the rulings can be the same as well. That is an example of analogy. Now, the other thing we pointed out is the importance of having clarity in a situation. Because if I want to know, let's say I have a question, is situation X the same thing as situation Y? I'm wondering, are they the same thing? So if I am wondering about that, the only way I can figure that out is if I'm very clear about what's going on in each situation. If I have clarity in situation X and I'm clear, I know exactly what situation X is talking about, then I could say situation X might be equivalent to situation Y. However, if I don't have that clarity, and I could say, well, maybe situation X is a situation of a murder, but maybe it's not really a situation of a murder. Maybe situation X is where they were fighting. Then I have no way to apply it to another situation because it's unclear what's going on in situation X. So that's why very often we said the Gemara will use what we refer to, we say bizarre, almost like a bizarre situations. In our case, the child being thrown off a roof. Why use such a bizarre situation, such a gruesome situation? The idea is because that way we know for sure that our situation is a situation of murder. That gives us clarity in our case. And once we are clear that situation X is dealing with a murder, I can then apply what happens in situation X to situation Y and use analogy. The next concept we discussed was the concept of a legal loophole. Let's first discuss what a loophole is, why it might bother people, and why, in general, halach. When you learn halacha, you learn Gemara, you're going to see plenty of loopholes, and there's a reason for that. A loophole is, in general, when you do something which is within the bounds of the letter of the law. The way the law is actually written, you did nothing wrong, but it goes against the spirit of the law. So, for example, if in class or in school you are told, we have a dress code. That dress code has some very specific laws to it. But let's say somebody wanted to come in wearing a mask and a giant afro wig. So there's nothing in the actual school rules that says you can't wear a mask and a giant wig to school every day. So therefore, doing that might not be a violation of the letter of the law. At the same time, that might violate the spirit of the law, because the spirit of the law of having a dress code is that people dress appropriately, so there's a certain amount of seriousness in the environment, and that mask and that wig might ruin that seriousness. So yes, you found a loophole in the law. Now, should you be wearing that to school or not? So you might argue that you should, but it's very easy for the school to say, listen, you're not allowed to do that. Because it goes against the spirit of the law, and we're going to tell you that you can't wear that, and I think they would be in their right. So what we're going to see is we're going to discuss a situation like that came up in our Gemara, and why we leave it that way, and why Rabbah doesn't actually say, it doesn't go with the spirit of the law and goes with the letter of the law instead. So the example that we had was the example of grumma, right? Where if you pull a pillow away from something that's falling and it smashes, even though you intended that pulling the pillow away would break the object, Rabbah says you still don't have to pay. Why is that? Because the letter of the law, the strict letter of the law of how you define something you have to pay for, is that it has to be what's called a ma'asa hezek, an act of damage. If you don't actually do an act of damage, you don't violate you don't break an object through an act of damage, you do not have to pay according to the letter of the law. One of the ways that we said that, like we just pointed out, is that it has to be direct. If you don't do it directly, sorry for that sloppy D over there, if you don't do it directly, then it's not considered to be a real act of damage, and according to the letter of the law, you don't have to pay. So if somebody takes an object, if someone sees that an object is falling, it's going to land on a pillow, and that person moves the pillow away so that the object will break, intending to break the object, according to the letter of the law, you did not actually do an act of damage, and therefore, according to the letter of the law, you don't have to pay. That is a perfect example of a loophole. So then the question we asked ourselves is, we understand that doing an act of damage is the letter of the law, and therefore doing something idea grama indirectly would not be a violation of the letter of the law, and therefore you wouldn't have to pay. But why would we set up the law that way? Why would we make it easy for someone to damage that way? So the answer that we gave in this case was because an act of damage is very easy to identify. It's very easy for someone to figure out, hey, that person did an act of damage. That person's force directly damaged the object, and therefore they should be held responsible. But if you do something indirectly, it's very hard to identify. That was a real indirect damage, but it was an indirect damage that you should be paying for, because again, there are plenty of steps that you can take beforehand that would cause something to be damaged indirectly, like we said in class. Let's times you kick a rock and it rolls down the hill and hits a dog runs into the street, car tries to avoid the dog in the street and crashes. So you're going to say that you're responsible now because you're indirect, right? Let's say let's say there's a pillow, like example in the Gemara. Let's say there's a pillow there and an object's going to land on it, and someone picks it up and breaks. So picking up an object is not really acting. Picking up a pillow is not acting on the object that broke. Maybe you're just picking it up to look at it. You can't be held responsible for picking it up just to look at it. I didn't know there was an object flying through the air. So since it's really hard to identify, did you mean to do it? Did you not mean to do it? Was there any way that you could have known that this was going to happen, or was it completely out of your control? Did you even know there was an object flying through the air? So since it's hard to identify indirect, therefore the direct letter of the law says, let's just stick with acts of damage that we know and they're easy to identify to make somebody pay. And also, as we pointed out, that a local Beit Din, again, this is different nowadays because the Beit Dins that we have nowadays, the courts that we have now, the Jewish courts don't have the same power. But back then, a local Beit Din had the ability to enforce the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. So they could say, listen, I know the general rule is that that it's only the letter of the law that has to be an act of damage. But a local Beit Din can say, according to the spirit of the law, and based on the evidence that we have, it's clear that you knew you were damaging when you did it indirectly, and you knew that the damage was going to happen. You intended it. You knew about it. We heard. There were witnesses that heard you say, "Hey, I'm going to move this pillow so that the object will break." So that local Beit Din can enforce a penalty in some way. But what Rava is telling you is that in general, you have to assume when it's indirect that a person doesn't have to pay unless you really can 100% prove that they knew exactly what they were doing when they did it. Okay, so now we have the concepts of, under our belt of analogy, we understand. We have the concept of, we discussed the idea behind loopholes and why sometimes loopholes are set up and it's okay, that's just the way things work. We understand what grama is, right? We talked about damaging indirectly. What we also didn't mention is the idea of patur b'yidei adam chayav b'yidei shamayim. That sometimes you could be obligated to pay for something. You might get out of something, right? Patur b'yidei adam. You might get out of paying in this world in our human courts, but God might hold it against you. So I think we talked about that in the previous video, actually, in terms of our concepts. So now we're ready to move on to some specific Gemara learning skills. Okay, we're going to start with using the Mesoret Hashas. Mesoret Hashas is this little this column here underneath on the inside margin of the daf here. In this column, Mesoret Hashas shows you if there's a statement quote in the Gemara, where else in Shas, in the Shisha Sidra Mishnah, where else in Gemara can you find the statement quoted? Why would you want to do that? What's the point of finding somewhere else? Find the statement quoted somewhere else. We said because it gives you more. I'm sorry, that doesn't say more, but it's supposed to say more. More info. Sometimes a Gemara quoted in one place will give you a limited amount of information, but if you look up that same exact Gemara somewhere else, you might get a little bit more info in that other Gemara that'll help you understand this statement a little bit better. Like just like in our Gemara. Our Gemara quoted a Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin, a Breita from Masechet Sanhedrin, about 10 people beating somebody to death. But it didn't give the reason why. So if you would then use the Masarat Hashas to find where it is in Sanhedrin, you'll see the reasons why for halacha Noel and things, and you'll understand that a little better. Let's look at an example. Let's look at two examples about how that works. The first one is on this page right here. You take a look at. I'll show you in a second. If you take a look in the middle of the page, you'll see a statement with a star next to it. Closer to the top. Takab Rishana, Mashach B'Shniyah B'Shtayim, B'Yado, El Ba'achat. Okay, there's a statement. The important thing now is not to know exactly what it means, but it's to notice that this statement over here has a little bit of has a star next to it. You see that little star? I'm sorry, it's not zoomed in enough. You see that star right over there? Okay, where it says Taka, there's a star right there. That star tells you this statement can be found somewhere else in Shas. How do I know? I look under the column Masorah Shas right across, and you see it says Le'el Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, and it says Lekaman Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. The phrase, the word I should say, Le'el, means earlier. Okay, that first one, Le'el, means earlier. That is, Le'el is earlier. And the other word, Lekaman, means later on in the Masechet. So this Masorah Hashas is telling you if you look earlier in the Masechet on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, you'll find the same statement. Or if you look later in Lamed Gimel Lamed Bet, you'd also find it. Let's take a look at Chav. I'm sorry, it was Chav Gimel Amud Bet, not Chav Zayin Amud Bet. And if we look at Chav Gimel Amud Bet, which is right over here. No, this is Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. I'm sorry. So here we are looking at Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. The way you know that by looking at the English number is that Lamed Gimel is equal to 33, and 33 times 2 will get you 66. So there's your 66 on the top of the page. The Amud Bet, if there's an English number, is usually double the value of what the Hebrew number is. That's just the way they used to. That's just the way they used to number things back then. So that's why you have a 66 there. So if you look on this Daf and Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, you'll also notice the same statement once again. Taka barishana mashach b'shina kishtayim ein ela achat. So there's that same exact statement once again. And again, if you look in Masorah Hashas there, there it is. Taka barishana mashach b'shina kishtayim b'yado el achat. And if you look again, there's a star there one more time. There's a little asterisk over there, and it tells you, look here, it says, look, La'el Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay, if you look at Chav Zayin Amud Aleph or Chav Chet Amud Aleph as well, you will find this statement quoted as well. So there you go. That's how the Masorah Hashas works within the same Masechet. Lekaman, look later on. La'el, look earlier. What about from one Masechet? So looking at a daf here, this is Masechet Bava Metzia, Daf Tzadi Dalin Amud Aleph. If you look all the way down near the bottom, you see a statement here where it says, the Tanya, it says in a Breita, Harei Zegitecha Manat etc., etc. Okay, you have a statement right there, which a bright code right there, and you'll see there's a little star again. There's a little asterisk, and that star tells you look to the side of the Masorah Hashas. Look, it says Gittin Pei Daled Amud Bet. So clearly we are not in Masechet Gittin. We're in Masechet Bava Metzia. That's why it doesn't say Lekaman or La'el. You have to look somewhere else. Masechet Gittin Pei Daled Amud Aleph. And again, if we take a look in Pei Daled Amud Aleph, and now there's a Hebrew letter, not in English because it's Amud Aleph. You'll see that same exact statement. Now I just have to find it because I think on this stuff doesn't actually have the star. Here it is. I'm wrong. Tanu Rabbanan, Harei Zegitech Almanasha Ta'ali L'Rakia. There's that same statement, and there's a star tells you. Look in the Masorah Hashas. Bet Mem Bava Metzia Tzadi Dalet Amud Aleph. Right again in the column that says Masorah Hashas. That's how that works. So on the test, I am going to give you a page of Gemara, a picture of a page of Gemara. I'm going to say, show me two statements on this page, and describe to me where you would look in order to find the statement quoted somewhere else. Something to that effect. You're going to have to be able to do that. Okay, and just a couple more things that I mentioned that we need to know in the test were a couple of terms. It was really just three terms. It was the phrase "de Tanya," which means as it says in a Breita. Now the word Tanya means it says in a Braita. Dit Tanya means as it says in a Braita. Dalet is always our proof letter. It says that whatever we're quoting here is going to be used as a proof. So, here's my statement as it says in a Braita, and that Braita now will be proving that my statement is correct. The second phrase we had was the phrase Tanu Rabbanan, Tafresh, means our rabbi has taught, and that always starts a new discussion. We also pointed out the idea that the word Tanu comes from the word Shanu, which means to teach, but not to teach in a way where there's a lot of thinking involved, but to teach in a way where you're just basically teaching over something that you had heard by heart, just a straightforward fact. The definition, kind of changing that in Hebrew, the word Shanu, Lishnot, means to teach something by repeating it, and therefore the Shanu turns into Tanu in Aramaic. And the third phrase we had was a very simple phrase, my tama. My tama, you're going to have to know what this means. It means, what's the reason? And again, my tama is always just asking the reason for a halacha. Right? How do I know that a specific halacha is correct? What's the logic behind it? You'll see the phrase my tama will be asking that question. And finally, don't forget that you're going to have to be able to identify parts of the Gemaras that we've done. Where does Rava's situation begin and end? Which word tells you what the ruling is? Which word says that we're introducing a Braita? Circle it, underline it, put a box around it, quote the Braita, put the whole Braita in quotes, underline the Braita, highlight the Braita, whatever maybe I'm going to ask you to do. Be able to identify those parts as well. And that is basically it. If I forgot anything, please remind me or ask me about it in class, and I'll try to bring it up and answer anything. If there's anything on the review sheet that I didn't discuss in this video or the first one, good luck studying, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.